The old bus rumbled to a halt, a wheezing metallic sigh echoing through the thick, late afternoon mist. Ethan stepped out, pulling his worn duffel bag tighter over his shoulder. He squinted into the swirling gray, the last rays of sunlight struggling to pierce the perpetual haze that clung to Oakhaven. He'd seen pictures, of course. Postcards from the 1950s, vibrant and sun-drenched, showcasing the quaint coastal town with its charming Victorian houses and bustling promenade. He had envisioned salty air and the cries of gulls, a quiet escape from the relentless hum of the city. What greeted him instead was a profound silence, broken only by the distant, rhythmic clang of something unseen, like metal striking metal. The air hung heavy, damp, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of stagnant water and something vaguely metallic. Oakhaven, his grandfather's hometown. A place Ethan had never visited, but knew intimately through fading photographs and whispered stories of a vibrant community that had inexplicably dwindled. He was here seeking answers, a cartographer by trade, now mapping the elusive contours of his own family's forgotten past. He had imagined tracing ancestral steps, perhaps even finding a distant relative among the few remaining residents. The bus driver, a gruff, silent man, merely grunted, gesturing vaguely towards the obscured road that stretched into the mist. "Last stop," he rasped, before the bus's engines coughed back to life, its red taillights quickly swallowed by the fog, leaving Ethan utterly alone. He stood on what felt like the very edge of the world, a deserted road that seemed to curve back on itself, even as it disappeared into the opaque curtain of mist. The surrounding trees, ancient oaks with twisted, gnarled branches, loomed like silent sentinels, their leaves dripping with condensed moisture. The town sign, a faded wooden board barely legible, read Oakhaven in peeling paint. Below it, in smaller, hand-carved letters, was an unsettling addition, "Where time finds its own path." A chill, unrelated to the damp air, traced its way down Ethan's spine. The clang he had heard earlier seemed to originate from deeper within the town, a hollow, rhythmic sound that was both unsettling and strangely hypnotic. He began to walk, his footsteps muffled by the damp asphalt. The mist swallowed sounds, making the silence feel even more profound, a heavy blanket draped over the landscape. Houses slowly emerged from the fog, their Victorian facades faded and peeling, their windows like vacant eyes. There were no lights, no signs of life, not even the distant bark of a dog. He passed what looked like a small general store, its windows boarded up, a faded open sign hanging crookedly. The strangeness of the town, its unsettling quiet, felt less like abandonment and more like a deliberate, profound emptiness, as if something had meticulously scrubbed away any trace of human presence. He reached for his phone, the familiar weight in his hand, a small comfort. No signal. He sighed, tucking it back into his pocket. He was well prepared for isolation, but this was different. This was a place that felt actively disconnected, intentionally removed from the rest of the world. He kept walking, the rhythmic clang growing slightly louder, drawing him deeper into the heart of Oakhaven. The air grew colder, the scent of stagnant water more pronounced. He noticed something odd about the buildings themselves. While architecturally distinct, there was an unsettling uniformity to their decay. The same shade of peeling paint, the same missing shingles, as if time had eroded them in identical, precise patterns. He finally reached what appeared to be the town square, a circular patch of crumbling cobblestones surrounding a dry, cracked fountain. The source of the rhythmic clang was now clear, a rusty, weather-beaten flagpole in the center of the square, its rope endlessly tapping against the metal pole in the faint breeze. No flag, just the monotonous, metallic echo in the overwhelming silence. A chill, more profound than before, settled over Ethan. This wasn't just a quiet town, it was a place holding its breath. Ethan found a small, single-story inn near the town square, its sign, "The Misted Rest," creaking faintly in the damp air. The door was unlocked, a silent invitation into the musty darkness. Inside, it was cold and quiet, every surface covered in a fine layer of dust. He chose a room, dropped his bag, and stepped back outside. The sun had long since vanished behind the persistent fog, leaving the town bathed in a deep, unnatural twilight. He decided to find the general store he'd passed earlier, hoping to discover some sign of life, a clue to Oakhaven's unsettling stillness. He walked for what felt like 10 minutes, his strides purposeful. The houses he passed were identical to the ones before, their vacant windows staring out into the mist. The air was still and heavy, the metallic tang of the fog growing stronger. He expected to round a bend and see the store, but instead, the crumbling cobblestones of the town square emerged from the mist before him. The rusty flagpole, still clanging its monotonous rhythm, stood directly ahead. He blinked. Had he taken a wrong turn? He was certain he hadn't. He retraced his steps, focusing intently on the path, on the distinct cracks in the pavement, the gnarled roots that buckled the asphalt. He counted his steps, mentally mapping his progress, a habit from his cartography days. Yet, after another 10 minutes, the town square, flagpole and all, reappeared before him. A cold knot tightened in Ethan's stomach. This wasn't a wrong turn. It was a loop. He tried again, this time turning right at a specific intersection he was sure he hadn't crossed before, aiming for the edge of town where he'd been dropped off by the bus. He walked for what felt like an hour, the fog growing denser, the silence pressing in around him. He passed the same boarded-up general store twice, then a third time. Each time, the peeling paint, the crooked sign, the very pattern of decay seemed identical. It was as if he was moving through a meticulously crafted illusion. A creeping unease, a sense of profound disorientation began to set in. His cartographer's mind, built on logic and measurable distances, recoiled from this impossibility. His internal compass, usually infallible, spun wildly. He tried the main road leading out of town, the one the bus had taken. He walked with determination, pushing past the ancient oak trees, ignoring the increasingly oppressive quiet. He walked until his legs ached, until the fog seemed to press in on him from all sides, until the trees themselves seemed to shift and blur at the edges of his vision. Just as a desperate weariness began to set in, a familiar sign emerged from the swirling gray. Oakhaven, painted in peeling letters. He was back at the town entrance, exactly where the bus had left him. The road leading away from the sign now seemed to stretch into an even thicker, more impenetrable wall of mist. He pressed his palms against his eyes, a dull ache throbbing behind them. The feeling of being trapped was not just a notion. It was a physical sensation, a pressure around his entire being. He spent the next few hours meticulously attempting to map the town, walking in ever-expanding spirals, trying different routes, counting steps, noting landmarks. The results were always the same. Every path, every street, every turn eventually led him back to a place he had already been, often the town square, or the inn, or the bus stop. It was a perfectly constructed loop, an invisible cage. The strangeness escalated with each failed attempt. He began to notice subtle shifts. A potted plant that wasn't there before, a window suddenly boarded up that had been open minutes ago, the subtle alteration of a stain on a wall. It was as if the town itself was subtly rearranging itself, mocking his attempts at escape, deepening the sense of maddening unreality. The air grew heavier, colder, and the metallic clang of the flagpole seemed to echo not just from the square, but from somewhere deeper, from within the very fabric of Oakhaven. There was no escaping this place, and perhaps no logical explanation for why. Days bled into a monotonous loop of the same futile attempts at escape. Ethan tried everything, walking in straight lines until exhaustion, following the faint clang of the flagpole, even attempting to navigate by the subtle shifts in the fog, hoping for a thin spot. Nothing worked. Every road, every path, every turn led him back to a familiar landmark within Oakhaven's invisible perimeter. The food he had brought dwindled quickly. He found an abandoned general store, its shelves surprisingly well stocked with canned goods and dusty jars, as if its owners had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. There were no fresh supplies, no milk, no bread. It was as if time had stopped for the town, preserving its last moments before a mysterious departure. He noticed other oddities. The fog itself, while thick, never felt completely opaque. Sometimes, at the very edge of his vision, he would catch a glimpse of something in the mist. A flicker of light, a fleeting shadow, a distortion that wasn't quite a shape but hinted at movement. The silence was also deceptive. Sometimes, when he stood still for a long time listening intently, he would hear a faint, almost inaudible murmur. Not words, just a low, resonant hum, like distant static, that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath his feet. It was unsettling, the sound of something vast and indifferent. His most disturbing discovery came on what he estimated was his 5th day. Driven by a desperate need for answers, he had focused his efforts on the small, dilapidated town library, its doors standing ajar. Inside, dust motes danced in the slivers of light that penetrated the fog-streaked windows. Rows of books, many centuries old, lined the shelves. He searched for local history, for anything that might explain Oakhaven's peculiar nature. He found only one book that seemed out of place, a large, leather-bound volume with no title on its spine, its pages filled with looping, intricate script that seemed to shift slightly under his gaze. It wasn't a book of history. It was a journal, old and brittle. The entries were written by someone named Ilara, a former resident, and they spoke of Oakhaven's unique essence. Ilara's handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the entries progressed, mirroring Ethan's own growing disorientation. She described the town not as a place built on land, but as an idea, a concept that was slowly solidifying, drawing strength from the memories of its inhabitants. "The streets shift," one entry read, "not because they move, but because our minds mold them. We are the architects of our own prison, unknowingly." Another entry spoke of the echoes, faint copies of past events, sounds, even people, that sometimes manifested, growing stronger with each passing day. She believed the town was alive, a sentient entity that fed on the continuity of memory, and by keeping them trapped, it was preserving itself, preventing its own dissolution. The journal hinted at a strange phenomenon tied to the town's founding. A group of early settlers, fleeing a forgotten conflict, had performed a ritual to root themselves deeply to this place, to forge an unbreakable connection between the land and their lineage. They sought permanence, a sanctuary immune to the ravages of time and conflict. But the ritual, Ilara wrote, had gone wrong. Instead of anchoring them, it had severed Oakhaven from the natural flow of reality, creating a self-sustaining loop, a pocket dimension that existed outside normal space and time. The petrification of memories and history within the town was a side effect, a symptom of its own arrested development. Ilara's final entries were chilling. She believed the only way to break the loop was to introduce something entirely new, something that had no place in Oakhaven's unchanging, repeating cycle. But what that something was, she didn't know. Her last words were a desperate plea for understanding, a warning about the encroaching void that would consume them if the loop wasn't broken. Her penmanship dissolved into chaotic scribbles, then abruptly ceased. Ethan closed the journal, his hands trembling. The rhythmic clang of the flagpole outside now seemed to mock him, a steady beat counting down to some unseen end. The town wasn't just holding them captive, it was consuming them, slowly, imperceptibly, turning them into echoes of its own past. Armed with Ilara's fragmented theories, Ethan's desperation intensified. He had to find a way to break the loop. The journal spoke of introducing something entirely new. But what could be truly new in a place that seemed to actively reject change, where every external input was either absorbed or redirected? He focused his renewed search on the library, hoping for more clues, any reference to the founding ritual or the town's unique connection to memory. He found nothing explicit, but a pattern emerged from the old town records. An unusual number of cartographers and historians among Oakhaven's early settlers. Perhaps the town's fixation on memory and its looping nature was intrinsically linked to the professions of its founders. He noticed other, subtle, unsettling shifts. The shadows around the town square seemed to stretch longer than they should, clinging to the buildings even in the dim light. The metallic clang of the flagpole grew louder, more insistent, vibrating not just in the air, but in the ground beneath his feet. He also began to perceive the echoes Ilara had written about. Fleeting glimpses of figures moving in his peripheral vision, indistinct, semi-transparent. He heard snippets of conversations, laughter, cries, sounds that seemed to rise from the very stones of the street, only to fade into the oppressive silence. These weren't the insidious whispers of the fog from his previous encounter. These were like residual energy, imprints of lives lived long ago, growing stronger, more defined. One evening, while walking through a particularly dense patch of fog near the town's oldest graveyard, he heard a distinct child's giggle, followed by a woman's gentle, "Catch me if you can." He spun around, his heart hammering, but saw nothing but the swirling mist. The sounds repeated, closer this time, clearer. He realized they were coming from a specific gravestone, an unmarked slab of granite half buried in the overgrown weeds. As he approached, the sounds became a vivid auditory memory, so real he could almost see the figures. It was a fragment of the past, playing on a loop. The town was not just preserving its memories, it was replaying them like a broken record. Ethan's theory began to solidify. The core of the loop, the engine driving Oakhaven's trapped existence, must be somewhere that amplified or contained these echoes. He remembered a recurring detail in Ilara's journal. A single, large oak tree, older than any other in the area, often referred to as the root. It was said to be the site of the original settlement where the founding ritual took place. He had seen its massive, gnarled trunk just outside the town, but every attempt to reach it directly had led him back to the town entrance. He reasoned that the loop wouldn't allow him to directly approach its heart from the outside. He had to find a way to get there from within the town. He returned to the library, now seeing it through a new lens. If Oakhaven was a collection of memories, perhaps the library was its central nervous system, its historical archive. He searched for old maps, property deeds, anything that might show the precise location of the route relative to the town's layout before the loops began. He found an old, faded surveyor's map, predating most of the existing buildings. It marked the route not just as a tree, but as a nexus, a confluence of faint ley lines that intersected directly beneath the town square, the very spot of the clanging flagpole. The flagpole was not just a marker, it was the physical manifestation of the loop's core. The metallic clang, once merely an irritant, now took on a sinister resonance. It was the sound of the loop itself, the constant resetting, the endless repetition. He knew then that the something new Ilara had mentioned wasn't an object, but an act. He had to disrupt the very rhythm of the loop, to break the monotonous beat that kept Oakhaven tethered to its own arrested existence. His plan, though desperate, was clear. He had to reach the flagpole, the true heart of the loop, and stop its rhythmic clamor. It felt suicidal, an act of defiance against a sentient, memory-driven entity. But if he didn't, Oakhaven would continue its slow, inescapable decay, consuming him and turning him into another echo in its endless, forgotten past. The fog outside seemed to press closer against the library windows, as if sensing his intent, the silence deepening into a watchful, ancient stillness. Ethan moved through the fog-draped streets towards the town square, the metallic clang of the flagpole now a deafening, insistent pulse in his ears. The echoes were everywhere. He saw figures flicker at the edges of his vision, semi-transparent and fleeting. A child chasing a ball, an old woman tending a garden, a couple holding hands by the fountain. He heard their laughter, their whispers, their mundane conversations, all overlaid on each other, a cacophony of fragmented memories. The town was actively resisting his approach, its looping nature asserting itself more aggressively. Streets he had just passed now seemed to stretch endlessly before him. Houses subtly shifted their positions, and the fog grew so dense he could barely see his outstretched hand. He was walking through Oakhaven's own past, its endless, self-preserving loop manifesting around him. He stumbled into the town square, gasping, disoriented. The flagpole, tall and menacing, pulsed with an almost visible energy. The clang was no longer just a sound. It was a vibration that shook the very ground, emanating from the base of the pole. The echoes intensified into a full sensory hallucination. He saw a bustling town, vibrant and alive, overlaid on the desolate present. Children played around the fountain. Adults chatted on benches. Carts rumbled by. He saw his grandfather, young and laughing, walking arm in arm with a woman he didn't recognize, their faces bright with an innocent joy. It was a trap, a desperate attempt by the town to immerse him in its past, to make him forget his purpose. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the echoes were inside his head, a full assault on his senses. "Come back, Ethan." A voice, familiar yet distant, whispered directly into his mind. "Join us. It's beautiful here. Forever." He saw himself, a younger version, laughing and carefree, sitting at a cafe table that wasn't there, beckoning him. This was Oakhaven's true weapon. The illusion of belonging, the promise of an eternal past. He focused on his breath, on the cold dampness of the air, on the solid ground beneath his feet. Not real. It's not real. He forced himself forward, one painful step after another, towards the clanging flagpole. As he got closer, the vibrations from the pole intensified, making his teeth ache. The echoes around him began to distort, the laughter turning shrill, the conversations twisting into dissonant whispers. The figures flickered violently, their forms elongating, stretching, becoming less human, more like the gaunt shadows he had imagined in the fog. The town was fighting back, its self-preservation mechanism in overdrive. He reached the base of the flagpole, the metal searing cold beneath his touch. The rope, thick and frayed, was wrapped several times around the base, secured by a series of ancient, rusted knots. The rhythmic clang came from a loose section of the rope, tapping against the pole. He had to stop it. He grabbed the rope, his fingers fumbling with the stubborn knots. The echoes screamed, a chorus of tearing, ripping sounds like fabric being shredded. The distorted figures lunged at him from the mist, their formless limbs stretching, trying to engulf him. He felt an immense, ancient cold radiating from the pole, trying to push him back, to keep its rhythm unbroken. He pulled at the knots, his muscles straining, his breath ragged. The rope was impossibly tight, fused by time and perhaps something more. He pulled harder, ignoring the phantom claws that seemed to tear at his clothes, the whispers that turned into guttural roars. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his hands as the rough rope chafed against his skin, breaking it. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, he yanked at the last knot, feeling something give way. The rope snapped free, coiling uselessly at his feet. The clang ceased. An immediate, profound silence descended, heavier and more complete than any he had experienced. The echoes vanished. The distorted figures receded instantly, dissolving back into the now utterly still, silent fog. The vibration from the flagpole died. The relief was immense, almost overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by a new, terrifying understanding. The fog around him began to shimmer, not with the distortion of echoes, but with a different kind of intensity, as if the very air was thinning. The outlines of the houses around the square became momentarily sharper, then blurred, not from fog, but from something deeper, a subtle distortion of their very existence. The colors of the peeling paint seemed to deepen, then fade, then flicker, as if their essence was being rapidly cycled through time. From beneath the flagpole, a low, resonant hum began, not a whisper, but a deep, mournful thrumming that vibrated through Ethan's bones. It wasn't the sound of a loop resetting, but of something unraveling. The air grew strangely clear for a moment, revealing distant buildings he hadn't seen before, beyond the usual loop points. Then they, too, shimmered and blurred. The town wasn't looping anymore. It was dissolving. A voice, not from an echo, but from the very ground, rose up. It was ancient, hollow, devoid of any human mimicry. The cycle broken, the anchor lost, time reclaims its path. It wasn't accusatory, merely a statement of inevitable fact. The fog, no longer a barrier, began to thin, not dissipating upwards, but shrinking inwards, pulling back into itself, revealing glimpses of a landscape that was impossibly vast and utterly desolate. Ethan looked around. The houses were flickering more intensely now, their forms wavering as if they were made of fragile light. The cobblestones beneath his feet seemed to ripple. He looked at his hands and saw them flicker too, semi-transparent. He hadn't just broken the loop. He had unmade the town, and perhaps himself along with it. The ultimate escape. But what was left to escape too? The fog was almost gone now, revealing an endless, empty plain stretching to a colorless horizon. There was nothing left but the quiet hum of an existence unraveling, and the chilling realization that to break the loop was to break Oakhaven, to return it and everything within it to the forgotten void from which it had sprung.